In this episode, we learn about Ottawalk and look at an intersection they consider dangerous. Then we visit the University of Ottawa, where a walking security index is under development. An engineer discusses the bridge to Hull that accommodates pedestrians and bicycles equally as well as cars. We talk with Ottawa's alternative transportation planner. And finally, we look at the official plan for the Ottawa-Carlton Regional Municipality. Stay tuned. We're in Ottawa talking with Chris Bradshaw, who's president of Ottawalk. What is Ottawalk?
Ottawalk is, the long title is the Association of Pedestrians and Walkers of Ottawa and area. And that basically means that we represent people who have to walk and those who love to walk together. We once said that we represent those who walk and those who oughta.
How long has Ottawalk been around?
We're just starting our 10th year. We formed in 1988 at the time that there's efforts by the City of Ottawa to have advisory input to designing pedestrian environments in the downtown area had really all come to completion, and we said, isn't there more that we should do? I mean, we're concerned that unlike many other activities, there's hardly anyone that has a financial interest in walking, so we don't see it promoted through advertising and various campaigns, and that we thought that walking is really everyone walks every day. It's part of every trip taken in the city, and there's very little attention given to it. There's such a concern by transportation engineers to move vehicles and forget about the efficiency of just moving people, and of designing streets to accommodate all modes rather than just to accommodate the automobile, that we thought that we had a role to play.
What sort of issues have you been pursuing over the last decade?
Well, we've taken on quite a number of them. We've been fighting for longer crossing times in the signals at various intersections, reducing the design of the curving of the road, which has been made, the turning radius has been increased over the years. We want it tightened up because here they are asking us to cross the street at the very point where the street is at its widest, not to mention the fact that drivers are often more interested in looking at where other cars are than where the pedestrians are, so to improve that. But we also have had for the last 4 years working with seniors groups on improving the quality of the walking environment on sidewalks in winter. Here we do have the City of Ottawa that runs their plows, their motorized plows down the sidewalks, but there isn't much attention to detail, and a lot of times they'll clear away the snow and leaving just the last inch, which often will turn to ice. We have some rainstorms in the wintertime. And of course that leads to facility for seniors, to them actually being captive in their apartment for much of the year. We're also involved in putting together the first of a multi-user pathway patrol along some of our parkway paths here, which will allow walkers, cyclists, and rollerbladers to volunteer and carry cellular phones and brochures and so forth, and help people understand the rules that are involved with sharing the pathway. But we've also been quite active in the broader issues of regional planning and road planning in terms of promoting the alternative modes and, shall we say, discouraging the use of the private automobile. It's now becoming a part of the new draft official plan here in the region, that we favor walking, cycling, and transit, and that we specifically provide for policies that will reduce the level of automobile ownership in the region.
Now, what sort of allies have you found in your struggles to make Ottawa more pedestrian friendly?
Well, we've, since in the last 10 years, we've been quite gratified that a number of groups interested in health, especially, safety, and environmental groups have come and invited us to be part of various functions that they've had. We've organized the big walk for the Earth Days most years that we've had them in the last several years, for instance. We have found it a little harder to interest merchants groups and tourism industry and the business community to it. They still believe that people who have cars are better off and therefore spend more money. They often don't realize that they only see people when they're on foot. They think that they come by a car. They don't realize how many of them actually come by other means, or come by foot completely. Tourists especially, conventioneers and so forth, don't arrive by car, and they generally don't want to be bothered by renting a car once they're here. We also find that the transportation people still are very resistant to the basic efficiency of accommodating walking. A walking trip costs far less in terms of infrastructure and traffic signals and law enforcement and pavement repairs and so forth than does a trip taken by the car. Not to mention all the pollution and then the personal cost to the individual. People can live far less expensively without owning a car, and that's a very important point when it comes to social services as well. That how much of the social service money is spent on maintaining an old car because they need it to get around rather than being spent on food and lodging, which is what the money is actually meant to be provided for.
What benefit is there to having a street that's full of pedestrians versus one with no pedestrians?
Well, it's interesting. A street that is full of pedestrians is one that actually is attractive to other people. William White, a writer from New York, talking about walking and planning, made the point that only walkers are attracted by congestion. All the other modal users actually avoid congestion because it obviously holds them up. But people are attracted by the contact with other individuals. There's also an important point that with a large number of people walking, it actually increases the feeling of safety with other people, and it also has a great deterrence to crime in public places, and to a certain extent, the crimes that are against property in people's homes. No one wants to emerge from a street carrying stolen goods and have people looking at them with their eyebrow raised.
What's on the agenda for Ottawalk for the next few years?
We're going to try to draw in more sort of allies into it. We're trying to approach the business community both in terms of the advantages for their employees, reduced costs of transporting themselves to work and health benefits, but also businesses that rely on their customers coming by foot. Downtown merchants associations also interested in the tourism community, as I mentioned before. We think we can provide them advice as to how, for instance, to redesign their own property to accommodate walking trips more, putting out benches, improving the pathways and so forth to their building. In terms of employee relations and human resources, walking is a very important part of pre-retirement training. People should be, in fact, getting their body fit for a retirement period because walking has become more important. It gets into so many different areas of better use of your staff and supporting them through all kinds of situations.
What intersection is this?
Well, this is a main intersection right on the edge of downtown. It's called King Edward and Rideau Street. It's really a place where we have a great amount of traffic passing through and trucks that are passing from one province to the other, and many of them are turning. This always creates an extra complication. A year ago, we actually focused on this intersection when we had a media event to draw up publicity for our pedestrian safety conference, which we sponsored along with the regional municipality transportation people and our safety council here in Ottawa. And we tried to point out the fact that the long distances for pedestrians were not matched by the right signal timing, especially for older pedestrians. We pointed out the fact that with the turning movements, there were times when vehicles were turning at the same time that the crossings were occurring. And even though drivers should know the difference, maybe they need a little help with the signals separating those two types of movements together. And we had quite a number of media out, and we marched across, and they were able to take pictures showing us starting at the last second we legally should start, and how we couldn't really make it to the other side of the street. We were actually left standing on this island in the middle of the boulevard, which is a little scary considering the island doesn't really extend into the crosswalk very far.
And what's happened to this intersection since then?
Well, since then, we haven't had anything that's changed with the intersection, even though our transportation department is aware of the concerns that we have. But just 3 weeks ago, we had an 86-year-old woman who was crossing the crosswalk just behind us, was struck by a tour bus that was turning left into her path. And we've looked at the intersection, and sure enough, the tour bus gets a green arrow at the end of the pedestrian cycle, and she would have probably still been trying to cross. And at 86 years of age, she wouldn't be moving with the same alacrity as a person much younger than her.
So it's not really long enough for a young pedestrian. It really wouldn't be enough time for an elderly pedestrian.
None of us were able to get across the intersection from the end of the walk signal across to the other side. We suspect she would have even had greater difficulty, even though witnesses said she was still in the walk cycle. The tour bus could have been a little anxious, and we were also wondering whether, because there's a possibility of double left turn, whether the tour bus operator was his view might have been obstructed somewhat by another vehicle also turning left.
So the intersection still needs some work then.
It does need some work, and one of the things we're asking for is that the coroner of the province of Ontario consider having an inquest on this death. This allows us to look at more than just the behavior of the driver and the pedestrian, but to look at the design of the intersection, the design of the timing of the lights, even the design of the vehicles involved. Do they allow proper visibility for the driver in all directions in such situations that these tour buses, as we know, are driven a lot of very tight pedestrian environments, and maybe there's a problem with the design of the bus, and an inquest can look at all those things.
We're talking with Professor Barry Weller at the University of Ottawa. You've been working on a walking security index.
That's correct.
How'd that get started?
That got started as a result of what was called the Transportation Environment Action Plan of Ottawa-Carlton, whereby they had a variety of initiatives to try and make things better for alternative transportation, that is, alternatives to the automobile. And I did an initial piece of research on the intersection that we're standing in front of, and that work led to the development of a proposal to design a walking security index for the regional municipality of Ottawa-Carlton.
And what are the components of an index like that?
Well, this actually is a piece of fundamental research and a piece of applied research, and what I propose to the region as the initial concepts is that safety, comfort, and convenience would be the appropriate start points for the index, and the report that's just gone in has concluded that those are three reasonable, significant components to include in the index, and so that's where we stand now, is that safety, comfort, and convenience are the essence of the index.
And what are the elements of each of those three things?
We'll have a series of variables that elaborate each of the concepts. You can't build an application or redesign roads around a concept. So we would take, for example, everything that would affect a pedestrian's safety, whether or not it's the infrastructure, whether or not it's the behavior of automobiles, or whether or not it's the behavior of pedestrians themselves that affect their physical safety. So that would be step one. Then we come to the question of comfort, and what that boils down to is mental duress, and that's not the same as getting whacked by a car. What that boils down to is being very upset or very uneasy because cars don't stop in time, or because cars push their way through. They don't hurt you, but they bother you. And it's like parents looking after their children, where they're worried about them crossing a busy street. There's mental duress. So we need to identify a set of variables that will elaborate comfort, and we're also elaborating a set of, selecting a set of variables that will deal with convenience. And convenience is defined right out of the automobile literature, for example, as involving time, involving distance, and involving cost of effort. So there will probably be something on the order of 30 to conceivably 40 variables that will go into the development of this index.
And where are we now in the process? Where do we go from here?
The process, as it stands now in terms of the research, the concepts and principle and components have been specified for the region. We're now going to go through the exercise of selecting the variables. Then I have to come up with a formulation for the index, and then the index will actually be used to rank intersections from the point of view of pedestrian security. That is, when you look at an intersection such as the one behind us, what is the level of security that provides to a pedestrian, and that means taking into account the safety, the comfort, and the convenience that goes into a pedestrian navigating an intersection. And there are, I think, 1,200 signalized intersections in Ottawa-Carlton. We will probably test out somewhere between 30 and 40, would again likely be our representative intersections to test the methodology with, and then the region, if it decides to adopt the index, would have to put in place an information system or a geographic information system to drive the application.
Now that's a lot of intersections to classify. How are you going to get all that work done?
Well, actually, what we've done here, I think, is something that's extremely innovative in the field of applied geography, in that I've had classes of students in the research methods course, in the urban geography course, in 2 planning courses, and I think even in a political geography course. We've had students anywhere from about 10 to, in the last class, I think we had about 45 who are out actually doing, making observations on vehicle behavior, pedestrian behavior, and the significant part of this is that students themselves are a body of people to whom most politicians and planners and professionals pay very little attention. But the fact of the matter is, they are pedestrians. They also become drivers. And I think what's happened here is they have become very sensitized to the situation of pedestrians at intersections, because as some of them have said upon coming back, there is nothing like an hour at an intersection to actually study behaviors of vehicle operators, to get a handle on just a huge number of morons that are out there behind the wheel. So this is really a first-class applications program for students at the university level to get hands-on involvement in how you do a piece of research, how you write reports, how you deal with elected officials, how you prepare yourself for becoming a professional.
We're in Ottawa talking with David Gladstone, who's a professional engineer. What is the role of engineers in producing a pedestrian-friendly environment?
Well, it's to basically do what engineers are supposed to do, is get the full picture of what the overall customer requirement is, and to efficiently meet it. There is this unfortunate tendency for transportation engineers to focus very narrowly on meeting car needs and then address pedestrian and bicycle needs sort of as adjuncts to meeting car needs. That really should not be the way it should work, and the bridge behind us is an illustration of how it should work, namely addressing everybody's needs together in an efficient and useful and usable way.
And what are some of the characteristics of this bridge that make it good for pedestrians and bicycles?
Well, first of all, there's the width. You definitely, if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist on this bridge, you feel elbow room. You have room to move. You don't feel constrained or constricted. The second major feature is, of course, the very substantial physical barrier between you and the car traffic. Perhaps a third feature, which is related to the first, is that you really feel that somebody has really thought about you as something more than an adjunct to cars. The width of the pedestrian cycle roadway is about the same as the width of the car roadway, and that really sends a strong message that pedestrians and cyclists are at least of highest priority crossing this bridge as are cars.
And how does this bridge fit in with the rest of the transportation system?
Well, it's kind of an odd creature. It's a federal government bridge. Okay, the federal government has the mandate for bridges across the Ottawa River between Ontario and Quebec. On the Quebec side, the bridge fits in well into a pedestrian bicycle network in the City of Hull in the province of Quebec. On the Ottawa side, it quite remarkably just sort of peters out when it hits the municipal road system. It's hard to describe, except if you experience it, but it just ends, literally ends. There's no signage there's no designated bicycle paths, it just ends.
We're talking with Daphne Hope, who's the alternative transportation planner for the City of Ottawa. What is alternative transportation?
Well, that's a good point. Alternative transportation, as far as our programs goes, means bicycles, pedestrians, and increasingly inline skating.
And what sort of plan do you have for bicycles?
We've got a plan that was approved by our City Council a couple of years ago. It's a comprehensive bicycle plan which addresses all the policy aspects, as well as identifies a bicycle route network and the projects that we're going to do to enhance cycling on the road, primarily for commuter cyclists.
And what sort of things are involved in doing that?
Well, it's a pretty mixed bag. It includes putting bicycle lanes on some of the roads. It includes improving the intersections, putting some bicycle signage up to indicate the key routes, building some linkages off-road to connect roads that wouldn't normally be linked by a road system. It also includes a lot of bicycle parking and other programs for encouragement and promotion.
What do you have in the way of a pedestrian plan?
Pedestrian plan is still in the works. We hope to eventually have a comprehensive pedestrian master plan which will address, again, the policies and all the issues about pedestrian facilities. Sidewalks, pathways, linkages, in buildings, outside of buildings, public spaces, street furniture, all of the type of thing, but we're still working on that one.
And inline skates, that must be pretty new to you. What's going on there?
It's new, it's growing, it's obviously something which people enjoy doing in the summer. The quandary that we face is, do they belong on the roads or do they belong on the sidewalks? There is partly a legislative question that we have to address, but in terms of the inline skates, we feel that it is an alternative form of transportation, and we're just trying to find a safe place for people to use them.
And some people hear the word alternative and they think, well, it's something that's not important, it's out of the mainstream. How important are bicycles and pedestrians to the future of the city?
They're very important. We have here what is called a green hierarchy, which establishes the priority for different modes of transportation. Pedestrians are at the top of the list, bicycles are second, then we move into other modes such as transit, which again can move most people efficiently. We move down the list to taxis, movement of goods, and then finally the private automobile, the single occupant vehicle at the very bottom of the list. That is our policy approach, that's our philosophical approach, so I think that indicates that pedestrians and bicycles take quite a high priority here.
2 years ago, Bicycling Magazine ranked Ottawa as the number 8 bicycling city on the continent. Why do you think you got that distinction?
Well, I think Ottawa certainly has done a lot in the last 5 years to promote and enhance bicycle facilities, but we've had the advantage of having benefited from the existence of the National Capital Commission here, because this is the nation's capital, and the construction of all of the multi-use recreational pathways. That occurred back in the 70s, but it really established a whole principle of people getting out, being active, bicycling for recreation, which gave us sort of a resident constituency that then was more willing to use the bicycle for transportation. Since that time, we've really expanded the whole pathway network, and now we're moving on to the roadway network. We have approximately 270,000 people who use the bicycle as transportation here. Of those, about 47,000 would be regular daily commuters. So we've really got a firm constituency. Now we're trying to move beyond that point and increase the percent of people who actually use bicycle over the private automobile. And to do that, we have a variety of programs, including construction of bicycle lanes and pathways and provision of more bicycle parking at a lot of the destination points. We're trying a lot of experiments with bike parking, including supervised bicycle parking, covered bicycle shelters, on-street bicycle parking for all the retail stores. And so we're really trying to move ahead and to move our way up in the standings of Bicycling Magazine's survey.
And Toronto was number 1 last time. Are you going to beat them?
Well, we're certainly going to try, give them a run for their money, and I think we can do it.
We're talking with Carol Christensen, who's manager of land use policy for the Ottawa-Carlton Regional Municipality. Recently, you've come out with your official plan. What is your official plan?
I think in American cities it's called a master plan. It's our direction, in this case, for the next 25 years for how land use and development will occur in Ottawa-Carlton. It also has policies for protecting the environment, and it includes our main policy goals with regard to transportation and provision of services like water and sewer.
Which, of course, are tied to land use. Now, what are the key components of your land use? What are the major concepts you're dealing with?
Well, the big difference between this new draft official plan and the previous ones is that there's much more emphasis on achieving urban growth within the existing urban area boundaries. There's not intended to be any expansion of urban area boundaries, and we're making sure that the provision of services, for example, makes it possible to infill and redevelop in existing neighborhoods, that there's the capacity to do that.
And what advantages does this have?
Well, we think that it's a structure that will best meet the needs of an aging population, because people want to stay in the neighborhoods they live in now. So if we can provide a choice of housing types so that they can move from their single-family home to another home, they can stay in their neighborhood. We're looking to make neighborhoods that are very walkable, very cyclist and pedestrian friendly. We started off our process with something called a community vision, and one of the things the community told us was that they wanted the environmentally friendly transportation modes to be used more and the auto to be used less. So we're trying to create communities where you don't need to use an automobile.
Okay. And a little bit more, okay, so you're trying to get away from auto use, and what are the different components of doing that?
We've always emphasized transit to a great extent, and we're going to continue to do that. Certainly a lot of the work trips to our downtown are done by bus, but within neighborhoods we've also always wanted it to be something that was walkable so that a child can walk to school, walk to do an errand, and it's something that can be done safely and easily. And we have a big emphasis on cycling as well. We have in the plan both an on-road cycling transportation network, and we also have proposals for off-road multi-use recreational pathways for both cyclists and pedestrians. On the pedestrian side, we've got policies, and I guess this applies to cyclists as well, to do things like review our current practices to make sure that our intersection designs, for example, don't create conditions that are hostile for either pedestrians or cyclists. And we have a new set of policies on roads as public space. And we're going to try and make sure that roads respond a bit more in their design and their function to the landscape they go through, the community they go through. So at the end of the day, we'd hope we'd have guidelines, for example, that distinguish between a pedestrian-oriented main street and the kind of treatment of the road through that area versus a road through a rural area or just through a residential neighborhood without mixed use next to it.
And this was just a draft of the plan that came out. What are the steps that you're going through in this planning process?
The draft came out in February. We just finished 3 days of public hearings, or a public meeting under our Planning Act, where people came in and gave us their response. And I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of support for the emphasis on cycling and walking. If anything, what we heard from the public was that they wanted us to be even more ambitious in our targets and in our policies in that respect.
So public input has been important to this process.
It's been very important to this process. As I said, we had 3 days of meetings, morning and evening. We were here till midnight one evening. We had over 300 submissions to which were summarized and responded to in a report that went to committee prior to the public meeting.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.